Right.
Yeah,
It sounds
yeah.
like a great dissertation
I
project.
think
for
so,
someone.
yeah. Not for us, but for
Not
some-
not for us. I'm not gonna.
Hi, Scott. It's good to see you after, what, like 15 years or something?
Something like that. Yeah, it's been a
Yeah.
long time.
So it's good to run into you here in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
And before we begin with questions, would you mind introducing yourself and say maybe what you do research on?
Yeah, my name is Scott Gregory. I usually put the W in there because there are other people with similar names, so it helps me make myself distinct from them. I'm an associate professor of East Asian Studies at the University of Arizona. My main topic of interest is early modern, late Ming, long form vernacular fiction novels. And my first monograph is about one of the most famous of those, the water margin, Shuihuzhuan. In addition to that, I'm the director of the Center for East Asian Studies on campus, which is a Title VI National Resource Center funded by the Department of Education.
Nice. And what do you work on right now?
Right now, I'm more and more interested in, there's a novel called, not Xiyouji, but Xiyangji, which is the journeys of the eunuch Sanbao, or Zheng He, in the Western Oceans. And the Western Oceans here meaning sort of geographically incorrectly Southeast Asia and Africa and the Middle East and everything. It's a fictionalized account of Zheng He's famous voyages, kind of rewritten in a Journey to the West style with all these kind of magical monsters and battles and all of that sort of thing.
Okay. Is it based on, in some way, on the Xiyouji?
It bears definite marks of being, I don't want to say copying, but it bears definite influence, yeah.
And does Buddhism feature there?
Absolutely. So just as in Journey to the West, the monk Tripitaka is accompanied by the Monkey King and Zhu Bajie and all of those people. Zheng He or Sanbao, I like to stick to the name Sanbao when I'm referring to the fictionalized character. Sanbao is accompanied by a monk named Jin Bifeng, who is from Hangzhou, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, and the novel in the beginning talks a lot about Hangzhou local temples and things like that. So there's Sanbao, Jin Bifeng, and there's also a Taoist celestial master Zhang. And those are sort of the main characters. And just like in Journey to the West, how nobody really cares about the monk that much. He's not that interesting of a character. The Monkey King is much more interesting and attracts most of the attention. The same with this one. Sanbao is almost like a minor character in his own novel, and Jin Bifeng, the Buddhist monk, is the main character. He's got a beard. He's got a shaved head like a monk, but he's got a beard like a hero. The story makes a big deal about this, how he's kind of this unusual looking character. Mm-hmm. And he goes and they fight all these monsters and all of this sort of
So any of that stuff is ethnographic?
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of it, and this is very typical of early modern, especially late Ming novels, where they just, it's so intertextual. They're just borrowing, cutting and pasting in modern terms from other sources. And a lot of the sources that they use are real sources from people, for example, the actual records of people who went on these journeys with the historical Zheng He.
Okay, nice. So what do you do with the novel? Are you like looking at it from a point of view of literature or as what, textual studies?
Both, I would say. Traditionally, there's sort of a canon of early modern, or I should say late imperial vernacular literature that was sort of put together in the early part of the 20th century when people like Lu Xun were trying to sort of organize Chinese literary history. And when they did this, they canonized, of course, that everybody knows the great novels, whether you call them the four famous books or the four masterworks or the six classics or whatever. And then there's all the rest. And there's a lot of junk, right? So I'm sort of interested in that junk pile, I guess you could say. Sanbao, as I like to call the novel Sanbao, it definitely falls in that junk category, and it was seen as very repetitive and seen as unoriginal, borrowing from these other sources and things like that. But by now, by 2025, looking at this sort of thing, to use a sort of computer term, we see that as features, not as bugs, this sort of intertextuality, intertextual borrowing and everything. So I'm trying to see aesthetically, I guess you could say, how, what is the aesthetic of this novel, and what are the sort of principles at work? I think it's something a little bit deeper than it's just an unsuccessful Journey to the West ripoff. So I guess that counts as literature.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I saw that your book is out.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And what is the book about?
So the book, it's called Bandits in Print, the transformations of the Chinese novel. Or it went through a few iterations. I forget what we ended up with for the final version. The water margin and the transformations of the Chinese novel, I think, is what we ended up going with. So the water margin is probably, it's in the top 4. If Sanbao is the junk, this is definitely in the classics, in the canon. It's a very strange book as well, though. If you want to provide a synopsis of the water margin, is really hard because it depends on which edition you read. Even the very basic facts of the water margin, it depends. There are 100 chapter versions, 120 chapter versions, 70 chapter versions, all of these different versions. And I think when I first approached that, I approached it very naively, like, what is the water margin? And I tried to answer this, and I couldn't get an answer. So I thought there must be some sort of different cultural dynamic going on here, where you can sort of freely adapt and change this sort of work however you like, if you're a publisher in the 16th, 17th century. And there are a lot of paratextual features like commentaries and prefaces and things like that can sort of shape the reading of the novel in particular ways. People shaped the water margin in particular in very widely different ways. Some people will say it's about bandits. It is about bandits. Some people will say that these are exemplary figures who you should emulate because they have these certain qualities of, they're unfiltered and spontaneous and all this kind of things. Other people take a more cautious approach and say that these are, these were desperate people in desperate times. So, they're sort of justified in all their antisocial behavior, but you should not be like them. There are all these different sort of shapings of the readings. So that's what I do in the book, is I try to process the extent to which you could shape and reshape this novel.
Okay. That's actually quite resonant to what I came across now, because I started looking at some of these so-called popular religion texts from like later China, 19th century or 20th century, early 20th century. And I see that the same texts by the same title are completely different.
Yeah.
And then there are texts with different titles, and they might be the same text.
Right.
And so the same title would have like 4, 5, 6 completely different texts. I mean, the theme is there, but like it's not the same text, right? And it's very hard to kind of work with this because you don't know what's going on. And
Yeah, and that's sort of the game that people were playing, right? It's not like they were, it's sort of an anachronism to go back and say that, well, they've strayed from the original or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Unless it's certain genres where the original would be viewed as having some sort of special power or special representative, being some special representation of its author or something like that. But at least with this sort of text, or in a early modern fiction text, and probably the religious text as well, there's just no expectation of that. Yeah.
And some of these texts are then translated into other languages, right? Quite early. So Chinese novels. They get translated into Manchu and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know much about that. I wish I did, but yeah, they definitely. I know that there was a Manchu edition of The Water Margin. There's a Manchu edition of Dream of the Red Chamber that's very famous. Obviously, all of these novels are classics, so-called classics, not only in China but throughout Asia. So in Japan, I didn't pursue that path, thankfully, because my friend up at Arizona State, Will Hedberg, has talked about the water margin in Japan, and it's a very fine line between what is an adaptation, what is a translation, and what is, all of these different ways of using the text. There's been work about that for Journey to the West in Korea, and I haven't read it yet, but there's another one about Romance of the Three Kingdoms in Korea. So there are all of these sort of people working on that, breaking down those geographical distinctions, I would say.
Yeah. So the ones in Japan, they get translated into Japanese, or are they in Chinese?
I think both.
Okay.
You can do the whole
Kanbun,
jumping around, Kairi Ten, all that kind of stuff, which for a classic, for a vernacular text would get really tiring. You might as well just kind of translate it into some version of Japanese, right? And then in Japan, work like The Water Margin will inspired a lot of these of other things like what's it called, the Hakkenden, the Eight Dogs Chronicle.
Okay.
And all of these things that are just pretty much like Edo versions of Ming fiction, I would assume.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, actually, because, again, I was looking at, by accident, I was working on something else, but I found a bunch of Mongolian translations of these, but quite late. So 19th century, 20th century translations of these big Chinese novels in different places, and they're like different translations. So people would just keep translating them over and over and over.
Yeah.
For local needs, probably.
For local needs, and probably adapt things any which way they want, right?
Yeah,
it sounds like a great dissertation project.
I think
for
so,
someone.
yeah. Not for us, but
not for us. I'm struggling with Japanese after all these years still. I'm not gonna pick up Mongolian.
Okay. And so when is your new book coming out with this Sambao?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been post tenure. I keep getting sucked into administrative type things, and I've got to try to get back to the research. I have some very vague ideas about a project that I might like to put this Sanbao stuff into, kind of dipping into other kind of forgotten pieces of that garbage pile I was talking about before. And maybe I can write a book about Ming Dynasty garbage or something.
That's also very cool, because many of the manuscripts from Western China, they come from heaps of garbage. Actual heaps
literal
of
garbage.
Yes, which smell. And so that's like Oral Stein. He would go to these sites and he would go after the smell to find the latrines from like 1,500 years ago, and also the garbage heaps. And he would excavate there because those yielded usually manuscripts.
Well, maybe someday we can put together an edited volume on garbage.
Garbage, sacred garbage.
Sacred garbage. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, what is it? The apotheosis of garbage or something.
King garbage.
King garbage, yeah. Garbage rules.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Publishers,
Yeah.
are you listening?
Okay. Well, it was wonderful to see you again after so many years.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time. And so, see you.
See you.
Bye.